from iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, TuneIn, Castbox, Podcast Republic, Deezer, Podcast Addict, Podchaser, and other fine podcast platforms. Confused for anything else. Don't point to me as a news source. I am not a news source. I talk about the news. This is a opinion talk show where we hang out together to take a moment to set aside all the monumentally challenging bull crap that we are facing as we slowly survive these challenging and stressful times together, but separately. Namaste, my friends. I humbly invite you to join me as I do every day or every other day or every other week, once a month, depending on how demotivated I'm feeling, to join me and all our other fellow listeners and contributors, knock on wood, that actually hasn't happened yet, but hopefully, maybe technically, this is the big breakthrough chapter on that. But we'll talk about that later. Take two on that sentence. Join me, my dear friends, the incorrigible Mr. Zappo, in the mental adventure of exploring and questioning a little bit of everything. Focusing on the open-minded and not too cynical exploration of the radical intersection of politics, society, and the multitude of transcendent spirituality theories, with an angle on looking through it, looking at it, looking into it, from a practical and pragmatic point of view. In other words, what are the practical and pragmatic terms that might actually apply to our lives, not just highfalutin theoretical ones. Hello and namaste. Welcome. It is Tuesday, November 17th. It's 12:17 p.m. This started out when I was beginning the process today, going to be a Good Morning Trumptopia episode. But it is clearly Pacific time, already noon. And in a world with different time zones, when Pacific Standard Time hits noon, it's the end of the day for everybody, no matter where you are. Even here, noon, from noon on, at least here on the wacky socialist blue tyranny left coast, we just check out at noon. Always have. Stop. We don't exist. We just leave. No, I'm kidding. I digress. What am I talking about? My Apple Pencil is very low on batteries. Thank you for telling me, magical iPad device of planet Terra. I am a cartoon character being role played by a performance artist whose name is not. I'm not trying to hide my identity, but I just don't bring it up, and I'm in character right now, so that guy can go fuck off. He's really annoying, a bit of a wimp, and too much of a worrywart, as they used to say in the UK. And I, my friends, am here to share with you my sincere and authentic enough for an imaginary character opinions about the world that y'all live in. Because I'm just sort of stuck here on a long-term visit, and I hopefully, knock on wood, shall return someday to my other dimensional place. Although some have warned me that that's impossible. But put a pin in all that, because that's just sort of contextual fan fiction stuff. If that tickles your fancy and you're like, what the hell is he teasing with that? Head on over to wattpad.com and find me using my trusty nom de plume, Mr. Zappo. In fact, I think the link is wattpad.com/user/Mr. Zappo. But if you search it there, you should be able to find it. Okay, so what is going on, and what do I have an opinion about? 2020 can go fuck off. 2021, with its I'm gonna be worse, threatening, like, resting bitch face that we see over the horizon, can go fuck off too, with all kinds of forgiveness and love and peace and harmony and rainbows and glitter, like a Care Bear radiation beam coming out of my third eye at it as a whole year, right? Like, whatever's going on next year, me and future us should be like giving it the double whammy, rock and roll middle finger double bird. What's the name of that guy? There's the rock and roll guy that has that. He's got this infamous image. I don't know if he was doing it with both hands, but I can never remember his name, and I'm kind of a fan. I forget. I digress. It's not important. I wanted to clarify something that I said somewhere along the line in the last 3-4 episodes, but I buried it deep, right? And there's a great line in a movie that I can't remember what it's called. Was it talk about burying the headline? If you haven't caught on, if you missed this bit, and forgive me for being redundant, because I think it's important. And it's rooted in that whole idea of come at it with double barrel of the middle finger / we're just teasing and being rough, tough love, forgiveness, transcendence, sparkles radiating at you. But I think the following statement is my most sincerest concern during this lame duck session, and as we transition into some blue tomorrow, I come up with these on the air, folks. No one writes this shit for me. As we transition into the bright, shiny tyranny of a blue tomorrow, and the DNC gets its way for at least 8 years, I predict. I'm not a predictor. I'm not a prophecy person. In fact, I almost always am the guy standing around going, hey, prophecy people, that's another prophecy. It didn't happen. I got a notch. I got a thing. If I was in jail, I would have a whole special section on my wall right next to my reading spot, wherever I would sit and read. And every prophecy that I see on the internet. I don't know why I put it as if I was in jail. Forgive me. That's rude to people in jail. Let's put a pin in that, because that's a whole social justice issue. By the way, I do seriously imagine the little pin noise. If you ever put a good, chunky, unnecessarily large thumbtack pin into a very fresh, not tore up corkboard in a really quiet room on a really still day, that, my friends, is a satisfying sound. Social justice, jail, experiences from inside the big house. Talk for another day. Also, I think I've rambled a little bit about some of that on a past episode already. So if that tickles your curiosity, hop around. There's no need to sit there thinking you've got to go in order and from either direction. Newest to oldest, oldest to newest. That is truly irrelevant with my show. Just jump around, like the song used to say, whatever that song was. Okay, so the thing I wanted to say, to kind of get to my opening thought for the show. And I mean this sincerely, and I don't mean to piss off and or trigger any MAGA hat wearing, gun owning, self-believing patriot that's defending Trump. Listen, we all gotta chill out about things. And this is a tough love, hard pill to swallow kind of moment. Because, and this also, there's something about this that it's also and when I'm looking at you, everybody else, over on Blue Team and third parties, because we can't just sweep the giant red MAGA hat wearing mutant elephant donkey in the room, right? We can't just ignore that. It's not going to go away magically. Trump got a record-breaking number of votes. Biden just eked out more, apparently. Even Fox News is reporting how the lawsuits are just waffling everywhere in every court. That the team Trump is putting in these frivolous lawsuits. There's probably some truth in that, right? All of his fear-mongering, as I say, is always anchored in something that you can point to that's real. But I digress. Let me sort of root myself for a hot second, because I think this is important and this is hard. This is a hard thing. But in my humble opinion, the fundamental problem with, and I say the following with love and forgiveness, not hate and conflict, but the fundamental problem with the Trumptopian cult of personality that people have bought into and have created a community around with multiple subsets of different varying levels of belief in things that are tangential and sometimes almost completely unrelated to Trump himself. But the core problem is that the base and all those beautiful, otherwise delightful human beings that deserve their rights and their freedoms and their good health and their security and their roof over their head and all the things that we all equally share in deserving and wanting and having a hard time fighting for ourselves, they are willingly giving their blind faith energy to a dubious, at best, sketchy AF at worst, individual who has been exposed previously to have run things, have run product lines or businesses that can be described only as problematically almost illegal scams, right? So he is a known scam artist. And politically speaking, and I apologize, but I believe I'm on this side of the line, and there's a lot of us on this side of the line. He has been, as a politician, I know he was not a politician before all this started, and I know the whole jam, folks, but he's proven himself like the history's number one most prolific pathological liar whilst in office. And that's not such a strange achievement if you look with a discerning eye to his personal history before getting into office. He most certainly wasn't some sort of virtuous George Washington type, I cannot ever tell a lie, right? And because they've given to him their personal allegiance, because there's no denying, there's no mucking about with the fact that Trump demands personal loyalty like a mafioso god head type, pathological narcissist that doesn't care about the law or the systems in terms of, the way they view the world and negotiate things. Having done this, having chosen to accept this individual, despite their glaring flaws and obvious inconsistencies and hypocrisies and problematic facts, they've endowed upon him, some people in the base. And I say this not to mock them, not to judge them, not to ridicule them, but to reckon with it bluntly, because we have to acknowledge that that is the case for them, right? Because the left isn't always free of doing some of the same things. They've just never done it with a guy so outrageous before. But they've endowed some sort of religious chosen status, right? There's a reason why I have quite mockingly called him the great orange chosen one. It's a play on the golden ones, and the chosen golden ones are, variations of that kind of language about enlightened people. Because I think, listen, let's pause and zoom back out. I'm pointing out this critique so that those who are listening, I don't know where you're all coming from, as individuals with your political background. And my political worldview may be a little bit exotic and strange and foreign to folks at first glance, especially if you've listened to less than 3 episodes, right? If you're on your 5th episode of my show, either most recent or going back a ways and whatnot, you might start to have a clearer sense. But like the first 2 or 3 episodes, I think most people will be projecting a lot of presumptions. Right or, accurate or inaccurate, right or wrong, that's just a thing we do when we consume media. And that's fine. Enjoy the ride, dearest, newest listeners. Even if you're relatively not so new, go for a deep dive. And this is not just shameless self-promotion. There is a sort of I need to review my EULA for Sprecher, because there is some sort of you can't ask listeners to listen to specific episodes. I'm like, wait, we can't promote our own show? I should be able to promote my own show and could be like, hey, check out this episode if you haven't yet. It's really good. But I digress. This concern of mine has many issues or many layers that I would like to address. First of all, I'm not trying to antagonize any theoretical or actual Trump voters, Trump supporters that stumble into this show. Welcome. Hello. You are welcome here. I'm not trying to attack you as a human being. I'm trying to point out to you and to anybody else, regardless of political affiliation, that hasn't seen quite yet that Trump is a bit of a blowhard. And even if you give him the most benefit of the doubt, he is not what he promised us. Well, he's not what he promised you. He's not what he promised his base. And he continues to capitalize that on a bunch of different levels. And while I highly doubt Trump would ever start his own church, I'm more likely to start my own church. And people might think that's hilarious, and people might think that's really alarming and scary, and some people might think that's awesome, right? There's a whole bunch of different kinds of people. I would support people starting their own churches because I think that religion should be more like yoga in that there should always be innovation. It should always be very like close to the people. It should be very sort of localized, but not exclusive. And it should be more like a practice and less like a dogmatic regulation of your mind through systematic indoctrination. But put a pin in that because that's a whole fun bucket o thematic subjects that I have indeed addressed before on the show and will indeed address again. But to realign with today's sort of opening statement, having said that, what do we do? In case I didn't round this out, right? So he genuinely is shady as fuck enough to be deeply concerned, but about him as an individual. And this isn't about attacking him just because he's trying to do something different. It's because what he's doing is dangerous. And we can get into that discussion, right? But the problem is, because he is a scam artist and arguably, by all measure, a pathological liar, someone who is out only for his own gain of power and or notoriety and or money, probably money being one of the main problematic issues because he is, according to various sources, $400 million in debt to, who knows who. Some shady as fuck people from other places in the world. And I don't know why, and I don't know the situation, and I'm not trying to antagonize anybody, but in terms of American politics, that should have been enough. If we had known that before he announced, I don't think the base would have run to him, right? Because if the base that is now his base had known early enough on in their journey of choosing him as their like champion politique, to make up an imaginary term, to coin a phrase, as it were. I think $400 million in debt to undisclosed foreign debtors, no, that's not the right term, foreign creditors, would make even the most Fox Newsian of red shirt Republicans, and I don't know if that's a fair. That has some historicalness there, and if you don't know about the reference, there's a great TV show right now that's a great entrance to that whole world. But I digress. I'm not here to promote other people's TV shows. We need to move forward as our own like patchwork of communities, right? Like, in my humble opinion, I do believe we need to move forward with compassion and forgiveness, and the like conscious understanding that Trump has painted the base into the corner of blind faith believing pretty much almost any and all of his lies. He has yet to make a statement that's so beyond the pale of belief that it chakabras their eyes open and they go, whoa, that's impossible. I can't. Oh my God, he really is just fabricating whole cloth. Like, and I think he's savvy enough never to like fall into that pit trap. But who never knows? Let's keep our fingers crossed and hope that maybe he commits that sort of error. There's a lot of debate, obviously, right? The talking bobbleheads on the screen machines are echo chambering their echo chamber. The left is spinning it their delightfully subtle way, and sticking closer to the facts. Let's give them that credit, despite the fact that, yes, there's mountains of corruption. On the issue of corruption, if you want to argue about corruption, I hope, especially in a sort of layering it in many different points of the spiraling through these topics kind of way, addressed my assessment about what's the most likely shape and or form of corruption and where that corruption may reside. So let's put a pin in that, because I want to come back to it in a full circle way in a future episode. But my response there is specific, and I think it all kind of makes sense in the long run. But there certainly is corruption. I do not live in some naivete, to double conjugate the word, in some bubble of pretending that, that Donald Trump is really going to protect me from the evil socialist tyranny, or vice versa, that the evil, that the gloriously virtuous Team Blue, whoever they may be, is going to protect me from the radical, gun crazy, white extreme right. From where I stand, it is a tragedy to me, dear friends and family, local and otherwise, that the American culture politique has become such obvious hyper-tribalism. And while I don't want to, dictate in any way, shape, or form to anyone what they should or should not believe, I do hope that when we share our opinions and think about each other's thoughts, and have public discourse about the world's problems, the context those problems are actually found in, and the people involved, that we may be able to set aside, ultimately, political ideology, because it doesn't seem to really help solve any problems. If it did, would we be in the redonkulous position that we find ourselves in this year of our Lord 2020? I ask you, dear friends and family. I think not. Let us take a brief musical break and listen to the G-Funk 101 remix track entitled Isolation Blues from my dear beloved imaginary friend DJ Zed and his album End Times. Namaste, friends. Welcome back from that brief interlude. As we traverse the final endgame chapter or act of this redonkulously bizarro universe cartoon madness of a year that will forever, however long humanity lasts, whether just around the corner and an asteroid hits or generations into space travel, 2020 will be known and talked about and referred to as some ultimate clusterfuck of crazy. In fact, the memes have already started. But I digress. In the face of all of that, and tragically, the emergent violence that is fomenting, that is brewing in the grassroots level of the way things work. Emergent violence, I might add, that is driven and or prompted by political, ideological, dogmatic rhetoric. Some, more than the norm gives credit, many, dare I say, are asking what can actually be done. I know I've addressed this issue before, dear friends, and I hate truly, dearly and sincerely, to be a bore with my repetition. But I think that, well, as one of my meme points out, if evil people can use the internet and social media to communicate evil, then virtuous people, truly, genuinely good people, even mediocre people who are trying to become good people, for there is that bell curve lump in the middle, not quite evil, not quite 100% genuinely, virtuously, amazingly good. And that's, I dare say, where the vast majority of us reside. We all sort of bear this burden of what can actually be done. And we're being lured, because, it isn't just Joe Biden's job. It won't be. And if he's a politician and the system continues as it was before Trump became a politician, and more importantly, if the system lurches forward in the butchered, brutalized, eviscerated, entrails ripped out and left dangling from the fucking balcony window of a draining of the swamp hack job that Trump seems to be doing on the infrastructure of this government. Whether you thought it was too big or not big enough, Trump is literally ripping the entrails out of it in a way that is, some might fear, irreparable. Have you seen the, what's that movie where he tells the guy the history and there's a painting in Italy? Oh, never mind. My memory's always like, I see the image, but I don't have the exact title. Anthony Hopkins is explaining to the police chief that's investigating because the FBI lady's called, right? It's the second one, I believe. And he explains the legend from the police chief's own family. I don't think he's a police chief. He's an investigator. He's an almost run out of the service corrupt cop. I don't remember, but he's got a hot wife and well, he gets butchered on the same balcony that his ancestor was butchered on, entrails dangling to the street. And that's a gory forgive me. Please forgive me, friends. And especially anybody out there who is not a fan of gorific images. And I'm not trying to fearmonger. I think that's the level of fearmongering that is being spun. And it's certainly worth contemplating deeply. What does it mean if Trump fires whatever that variable percentage of too many important people from the infrastructure of government and critically, the military wing. And I get it, right? Like, let's pause here. I'm talking about healing. And QAnon has infiltrated the yoga community, right? That's something that I've seen reported on a couple of different platforms. So I think we can talk about it water cooler style. And that's frightening. It's bad enough that there's an elected official now serving in Congress that believes in QAnon conspiracy theory. And to me, it's a tragedy because I can't count on my hand more than but one open, out of the closet, talks about chakras and love, hippie type, representing at least in the broadest sense, without getting caught up in schools and various dogmas and traditions and cultural appropriation, et cetera, the spiritual community, the spiritual people of the world, the spiritual people of America. And I don't know if that's because there's not enough to trigger that representation. But if Team Blue is all up in arms about representation and what do they call it? Not mirror ability, but like representation ability, like how well they represent the diversity of the demographic that they are supposed to be big tenting as representatives in government. There's a new phrase. It's being used on the boob tube, and I heard it like in the last 18 hours, and I can't remember what it is. And it's adorable. I'm sure they'll use it again. I'll see the same clip. So all of this is going on, and the tragedy is that if you set aside the extreme portions of how weird 2020 has been, just set them down. Pretend we aren't in a sci-fi fucking version of reality. Pretend it's all hunky-dory, 1990s kind of normal. Like it's 1998 again. And the weirdest thing is that we're the really nerdy people know about the 2000 bug. But everything is totally normal, dude. And then this shit happens? Unacceptable, right? Like the where things are at. But set them aside. The system, the duopoly, pre-Trump, that normalcy was toxic for you, was toxic for me, was toxic for everybody, and was part and parcel of what unfolded and became the context we find ourselves in now. And the missing ingredient, in my wild and crazy humble opinion, dear friends, is a bit of like authentic, organic, spiritual healing magic. If I may be so bold. At 42:24, when I looked up at the clocky bits and was saying that sentence, to say, and that I'm not here to say my brand, my version is the one you should buy my books. I don't have that. Will I write some books? Yes. Will I want people to buy them? Totally. Will it be a religion? I doubt it. Will I write literature about people who start a religion? Yes. Do I think that what humanity needs is a great big dose of becoming spiritual, not religious? To put it in a catchphrase, to put it in a terminology that's sort of ubiquitous right now? Absolutely. And do I think that even if we use the tools of religion, because I don't hate all religions, I don't hate any religion, I just think that categorically speaking, objectively speaking, they've all been similarly hijacked if not equally corrupt, they are, relatively speaking, in some form or another, infiltrated. Because what's missing, what isn't happening, healing. And maybe I'm crazy, folks. Imagine me like in a radio booth, in a station on the air with headphones. I'm not wearing headphones. That would drive me nuts. And there's a reason why, but we don't have to talk about that now. But talking at that classic big mic on the thing, I don't have that. I'm just talking to my iPad. But I do have like the stretchy, similarly designed lamp on an arm, on a crane, on a springy thing. Sometimes I pretend that I'm talking to the mic like that, but I don't know. Anyways, imagine I'm telling, like, I might be crazy, folks. That's just an image. And I'm reminded of, to sort of give you guys a visual reference, there's a scene in the early parts of this movie, and if you've never seen this, you really should. Honest, genuine, authentic, unsolicited, unpaid for endorsement. If you've never seen is it Frank Oz that directed it? I believe so. Miss Piggy, Kermit's girlfriend, directed Little Shop of Horrors. And that's the kind of, by the way, personal note, like, as someone who is not currently married, someday in the future, and if I never do in real life, I will write this into my romantic rom-com literature. I want to marry someone that's a little bit like, I want to have like a Kermit the Frog, Miss Piggy kind of power couple relationship. Mostly because in my fan fiction world, they ran that theater successfully for like 30 years. It was like the whole, and it was way more than just what we see in the Muppets TV show. Because I don't think they ever get married, right? In canon Muppets history, I don't think Miss Piggy and Kermit the Frog ever get married. Although I do remember that like there was some scandalous breakup at some point, right? Maybe they did get married and then they got divorced. I don't know. It doesn't matter. I'm a horrible fanboy of that franchise because I don't know. At least, and I can't recall right this hot second, and I don't have like research content. And that's got nothing to do with what I was intending to talk about. But yeah, all of those things, I'm enthusiastic about it. And also, what's the one thing that's not happening in this reality? Whether you think it's dystopian or not, it's healing. There's a lot of fighting and arguing and theorizing and pontificating about freedoms and tyranny. In a us versus them, no one can win the fight or the debate or the argument because it's all about objectifying the other. And if you dehumanize half of the country because they're dehumanizing you, because they think you are agents of evil and they must therefore be what they are accusing you of, how do you get any healing done? Do you know? Do I know? I've got some running theories. And in the theoretical, visionary, big picture, money was no object format of this show, I would be sitting here around a really awesome setup, much more complicated and sophisticated than just my iPad. But hey, there's nothing wrong with iPads. Maybe it would be a bunch of iPads all wired together so that they were live recording. I don't know how I would do it, but I would do it fun and cool, especially if Apple wants to, sign me up for Apple endorsement and throw a bunch of product at me. Boom! I theorize. That's not what I wanted to talk about. This is my humble opinion, right? Like, based on what? My entire time being stuck here on this planet and observing, the ambulatory, semi-autonomous talking movie cameras for divine consciousness that y'all are, and your adorable foibles into self-destruction. And sometimes I speak like I'm different than you, and sometimes I speak like I'm one of you. And that's just the impact of having associated and been here for so darn long. And that both are true simultaneously and aren't necessarily mutually exclusive. So, okay, forgive me for beating that dead horse, but if healing is the answer, then what is the first step? Well, acknowledging that should be next, I think, theoretically, just as a sort of, how do we think about it? How do we address that? Can we agree? Dear audience of public discourse, dear participants of public discourse, dear world, open letter to the universe. Well, not the entire universe. That's complicated, and I don't know how to send that anymore. I think I used to, but dear letter to everyone who's listening to my podcast. Can we agree that better than beating each other up, more interesting than profiteering on each other until we all die, more awe-inspiring than arguing about whose political party is most righteous and true and whose is demon spawn, more urgent perhaps even than any of those things and any of the other distractions that we are comfortable with and or dare I say it, maybe a little addicted to, and maybe more meaningful in terms of the question, is there a calling, a spiritual one, a transcendent one, an invitation from the living universe itself? And if those, we clear those hurdles intellectually and go, okay, yeah, so if that's healing, what do we do? What is it? Well, not to be a big nerd and not to be like, and here's where you subscribe to the belief that I tell you to believe in, because that's not what it's about. But there have been some words spoken quite eloquently about it as a conundrum, right? As a mystery of life. And I think that if we build consensus and we anchor it on this concept that healing is integral, healing is not something the drugs do or that the doctors do to you. It's a force in the universe. And that alone, that acknowledgement, that aha moment, that healing is not an abstract conclusion of events. It isn't accident, not in good shape, healing, done, as in different discrete. It's a force of the universe. And that everyone who's ever been a messenger has in some way, shape, or form contextualized in that language and in that moment in history, etc., 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 tried to remind us of that through teaching of wisdom, wherein which we can directly remember it and know it through phenomenological experiencing of it. Whoa! So if healing is the solution, it can be said that, violence must not be. So why are we engaging so much effort in fomenting violence? I don't know, but maybe we should stop buying into it, wherever it's coming from, even if it's something we believe in ourselves. Because many do. Many cling to their belief that they have this right to execute violence on others, given certain parameters having been met. But if the solution is healing, why should preparing for violence be the most critical thing that we're focusing on? Why aren't we focusing on healing? And and I get all of the allegories, and I've spent many a long meditation session contemplating the parable of the conversation between student and master that talks about being a farmer, it's better to be a warrior that's occupied farming than a farmer that's been thrown into a war. To paraphrase it, to pull my own, I don't think that's exactly how it's written, but there's variants on it. But, that's this lesson that is taught. I think it starts with a question like, Master, why do you speak of peace while you teach us violence? Or something to that effect. But I think you see my point. And if we really think about it, okay, sure. But at the deepest level, at the deeper level, and here's where I'm calling out to like any and all already predisposed to self-identify as spiritual types. Like that being true, or if that being so, then we must truly step into the confusing and overwhelming journey of not just acknowledging intellectually, but comprehending personally, emotionally, intellectually, physically, bodily, energetically, what it means to be the revolution. Not want to go have a revolution, but be the revolution. In that sort of, epic aum of the universe, enlightenment, consciousness, revolution of the mind, revolution of enlightenment, revolution of, as the yogis say, the self-liberation of one's own mind. And there's obviously a lot of people selling books out there about this subject. And I'm not here to diss them or disrespect them or pan them. In fact, I have a bookshelf as I clatter my various dishware around. I have my very specific bookshelf with its, we can nerd out on a whole special episode about the books I have on my bookshelf. Which makes me think of that other meme. I forget, he's a movie director. I forget his name right now. But he has this brutal, he was really brutal in his wording always, in his language. And he's memed as having some really blunt opinion about dating from back in his day that's applicable today, I think. Don't go home with anybody that doesn't have a bookshelf that turns you on. I don't think that's how he wrote it, but that's how I would say it. And how do you can't really know that until you go home with somebody, because it's like, how do you tell me about your bookshelf from far away, please? But anyways, that's not what the show's like. My bookshelf is really specific, and it's got everything. This bookshelf and a half. These two, well, the bottom shelf too, mostly. Although there's some movies in there, and they're not all immediately directly associated. But the top shelf, I have curated and reviewed and reorganized and curated and spent a lot of time nerding out about these books because, I value them particularly under the following sort of science fiction-y future comic book action dystopian world I want to create. I want a character that literally does this, and I don't know, God bless it, God forbid we actually endure, I don't want to invoke this. I'm not voting for this universe. I don't want to actually live through some collapse of society, right? I want to write a comic book about the multiverse of people I imagine surviving the collapse of society as warning tales to hey, maybe we shouldn't let society collapse, folks. Maybe we need to re-engineer it a little bit and heal it and reform it and heal it because healing should be at the center of all of it. But I I don't know if y'all ever watched that episode of The Twilight Zone where this guy is the last guy on Earth and he finds himself at an amazing library. I don't remember what city he's supposed to be in, but it's this epic, huge, Olympian-like library. And by that I mean that like the building itself is architecturally very deeply influenced by Greco-Roman Olympian type influences. And we get to this tragic sort of end moment where he's finally settled down with some books and he ruins his own reading glasses and is now effectively kind of blind. Well, flipping that image on its head a little bit, I imagine my own quirky, like, foolish, and that he's a lot of my characters are in my as of yet given birth to literary work are clowns. A lot of my characters are clowns or fools in archetype, but a sort of foolish prepper that prepped in most other people's opinions in all the wrong ways. But one of which is prepping a system of keeping and preserving and transporting somewhat reasonably through and beyond the slow collapse or grinding to a halt of society in some dystopian comic book future, because he's obsessed with this collection of books and believes that it is critically important that they not only survive, but they be carried forward and that other copies of them be found and distributed. And barring that, given I don't know how horrible I want to take, I haven't written much about this. It's just sort of a living character study vignette that lives in my head, and that I've written a couple of notes about and have occasionally talked about on this show. Do not steal my ideas. I say almost self-mockingly because they probably are all already gone, right? Someone's already had them, and someone already in the position of creating them is probably already cranking them out. I have that curse. I have seen movies and I'm like, I wouldn't have written the entire movie that way, but holy shit, that sequence of events and that moment in the middle, I've seen that unfold in my head and wanted to write it all down and build a movie around that. And I don't know if that's just a weird delusion of my own or a fascinating, neglected, and somewhat paranoia-inducing aspect of the way human consciousness and the human species functions. But I'd wager on the second, not the first. At any rate, where are we? These books, I would, if I was that character, and as I draft out his actions, I would, have this struggle of choosing from this and a slightly larger fictional collection of books, because I want to throw in some books that do not exist at all in the real world of the audience who reads them, to pare that collection down to the most important and carry them forward, find other existing copies of them, and or produce new, maybe even old schooly hand scribed copies of these books. Not quite as primitive as the sort of hand carried forward teachings in Cloud Atlas, but up those alleys. And he gets into that whole what changed the world when we invented the printing press? That someone published the Bible and started translating it into people's languages and mass producing it, so that they didn't have to just take blind faith interpretations of Latin they didn't understand anymore. They could just read it in their own reading tongue. Reading tongue sounds hilarious, and I think that should be the term we use. But I digress. Epic vision of some literature I'd like to write. having fallen out of my head and filled your mind for a hot second, let me pause and set that all aside. In that dystopian future, those books, which would include excerpts of the Bible, but not the Bible in any of its current forms as itself, right? Because there's a lot of garbage in the Bible, in my opinion, and I think we need to there's an alchemical term for this. I think we need to distill and reconstitute the Bible. But that's an alarming and potentially offensive statement to make. But imagine it, friends, as an artistic statement about finding the most redeeming and spiritually significant ingredients of the Bible and all other religious texts, in the hopes of forming some better, higher understanding, right? Like, akin, to bring it back to politics for a hot second. And I know that I believe in the separation of church and state, but I believe also that we are called to live our spiritual truths no matter what we do, and that there's a valid worldview that is underrepresented in politics that offers a valid and meaningful counter-offer to any and all of the Civil War, violent revolution, shooting each other on the streets types stuff that being thrown around out there, and any of the stuff that leans towards that or helps foment that but isn't overtly that out there. And that's that the real revolution that we must attend to is a secular, organic, not about arguing about dogma, but about negotiating with reality on reality's terms, and maybe reinvestigating, rediscovering, remembering some of the forgotten, neglected, ignored, spiritual, energetic, magical, cosmic, divine, functional facets of our beings. And that given that sort of understanding, healing as a power, a force in the universe, I think we can turn to it. It's sort of like how, there's COVID deniers and sort of not COVID deniers, but in the middle there's those that also really sort of hinge their actual opinion on the fact that we have, in truth, an immune system. Now, what a lot of the negative trolling psyop content out there is doing is it's projecting this predisposal to assuming, well, my immune system's great, even if it maybe isn't, and everybody else's immune system, they should just fucking suck it up. And that's a really sort of irresponsible attitude to take. But yes, of course, we do indeed have an immune system. And it has its own user manual. And it also has its own problems and weaknesses. And, the counter argument to, of course, masks and vaccines are not a replacement or a substitute or a reason to disregard our immune systems and all the healthy ways in which we can boost them. No one on the other side of the argument is actually really saying that. We're being manipulated to argue about that kind of stuff instead of really healing ourselves and addressing all the scientific and spiritual ways in which we might heal this problem at the species-wide level. Because, call me crazy, but as a former Bible-thumping Catholic, and also at some point after transitioning a self-described, liberated, non-denominational. I never used the word born again because I kind of never really liked the born again attitude from born againers. No offense, you guys, but it was really kind of hyper militant from the get-go from those individuals that I came across. But some would call me a born again because I left the Catholic Church and tried to be a Christian without the Catholic Church, whatever you call that. And then ultimately realized that Christ himself would be like, what are you doing being part of the church, bro? And that's not what we taught. That's not what I taught. That's not what Mary Magdalene and I taught. We didn't build a church. We built a living community practice that is the energetic living church, right? Not buildings and money funnels and dogma to follow, but community organization around spiritual practice that facilitates the well-being of everyone. And does what? And I know this sounds crazy and like my logic is spiraling way out there to some crazy place. But follow me, dear friends and listeners. What is the duopoly doing sort of amidst the chaos of Trump stomping around being Trump, like the bull in the china shop, not the china in the bull shop. Although I guess if you got one, you gotta image the other for comedy's sake. What's one of the things that's really, really important and was really important even before COVID started raging, or I don't know. We can do a whole mini series on COVID-19. But what have the political parties been fighting over and basically helping each other fuck us out of in one way or another because they sort of good cop, bad cop leverage us into a worser scenario on healthcare? That was a big lead up, wasn't it? But what's the irony about that? Team Blue, arguably from their perspective, the good guys, say that, some mix of profiteering and profit sharing, to not use the dirty term socialism now, or socialist-like, some form of making money and sharing the money so that more people can afford healthcare is the solution. And that, yes, some of that is giving it for free, but we should never resort to it being government-run, scary socialism. They're trying to walk that line. What are the Republicans doing? I don't even want to get... they're doing some clusterfuck of chaos, self-destructive hypocrisy, because much harder than Team Blue, Team Red claims, self-identifies as believers in Jesus. Meanwhile, back in whatever actually happened in reality, those who we historically point to with the titles, not proper names, Yeshua Christos and Mary Magdalene, although I don't know that that's actually her title. That may have been more of a name or of a fictional name. She has a proper, spiritual title, which Yeshua Christos is. That's when the Pope takes on his Pope name, when he becomes the Pope. Jesus had done that same sort of thing as part of the Nazarene tradition, or the Nicene. I forget which one's the one that is the closest. Anyways, what were the two of them doing? If you take the Gospels, chuck everything out, respectfully put everything else on a shelf, to not be rude, and just look at the story of Jesus, and remember that Mary Magdalene played a bigger role because bigotry erased her and transformed her into, reduced her and other women into whores, as opposed to what they actually were, co-matrices, co-creators, co-partners to Jesus and the apostles. what were they doing roaming through Palestine and Israel and other parts of the Middle East, and possibly also Egypt and India, right? Like, I know that Egypt is in the Middle East, but you know what I'm saying. What were they really, really doing? Sorry for the suspenseful buildup. They were healing people for free using, drum roll please, spiritual magic, divine healing magic, the grace of God, whatever you want to call it. Something that Big Pharma would probably go, we're going to laugh in your face about it. But if you're going to pretend to believe in the teachings of Jesus, there's a lot of reckoning to be done with the whole we aren't healing people for free stuff. Because one of the most important things, I think, if I may, forgive me for getting a little on the preachy side this morning, but this is a spirituality show, right? This is a discussion of the intersections of all the things. And today I feel inspired by the Holy Spirit, my friends, to speak a little on the Yeshua Magdalene situation. And they were healers. Some over there on the wacky New Age nutjob side of the spectrum might agree that they were Reiki healers and or energy healers and or some variation thereof. And I am here to tell you, my dear friends and listeners, not to offend you, should you have a very particular interpretation of what Jesus was, but I'm inclined to vote for the reinvestigation of Jesus under that sort of understanding, because my lifetime of questioning and earnestly wanting to know, not to tear down the story or the mythology or the institutions, but rather to comprehend what might be the most plausible, realistic, organic interpretation of the bulk of the evidence as presented. And that, my friends, is that these two enlightened or enlightenment-oriented fractal consciousness human beings achieved an exemplary modality of operation, which might be called being the Buddha, being the Yeshua, and being the divine masculine and the divine feminine as children of God, incarnate with fleshy things and energy things. And that having achieved that, which may or may not be intrinsically tied to opening the third eye, but I'm inclined to suggest to you, dear friends, it actually might be. And I don't have chapter and verse, but I mean, Yeshua literally says, everything and anything that I can do, y'all can do. And he also says, if you open your third eye, and I'm paraphrasing severely, friends, but there is, like, I've made the memes. They're out there with the chapter and verse. If you open your third eye, you shall activate your body of light. You shall, engage in your light energy being. And I think that, dear friends, is the spiritual calling. I think that the yin and the yang, the living universe that is mother and father, and the archetypes of spiritual gestalt or, archons. There's plenty of words to kind of point to what I'm indicating, but that there is a Jesus and a Mary that are sort of the primordial spiritual Adam and Eve before Adam and Eve, and that those are allegories for life in this womb that is alive, not an objective object place here for us to destroy, right? And that if we attend to that calling, not in a, we got to force people to believe in one thing, but by turning inwards, attending to the mystery that is singularizing our eyes so that our body may be made of light. If we attend to that ourselves, which requires no belief. That's one of the brilliant things about it, friends. The direct phenomenological experiencing of your own consciousness and your own energy flow and your own body in a heightened and more awe-inspiring rainbow magic sparkles, unicorns and angels and cherubs and sort of, dazzling kind of way is individually verifiable. Testifying. And I'm not alone, right? And it doesn't require dogmatic belief in anything. It requires you to shut the hell up for a hot second, look inward, and commit to allowing your inner realm to reveal itself to you, and intuitively attend to the healing that you are individually in need of as a person incarnate and at the spiritual level as a spiritual being. And that all anyone can do, dear friends, is point to that door and say, that door is where you'll find things that are beyond solutions to the mundane problems of politics and war and corruption and ego and profiteering and Illuminati and system of oppression. And that's why the system of oppression ridicules, marginalizes, vilifies, and castigates and punishes those who pursue these spiritual delights. And yet, I would posit, dear friends, this is all a dance macabre of the light and the dark reunifying in a grand metastructural, I butchered that word, metastructural spiritual dance of healing itself at a scale that boggles the mind. And that the way we attend to facilitating that, which is going on at some other inner, outer, as above, so below meta place, some meta-dimensional, ultra-dimensional place that can seem aloof and totally have nothing to do with our daily grind and our political craziness. But it does, because we are part and parcel like leaves on a tree, intrinsically entangled in all of it. And that once we sort of gain perspective and understanding a little bit and start working on that healing, and start rediscovering our own intuitive understanding, and then therefore revisiting and re-understanding and reinterpreting the messages from our enlightened facilitators, who are human beings born to be examples of our fullest potential. In that framework, dear friends, I can understand why there are people who think that Trump is some sort of chosen orange one, right? Because he peddles a different theory wherein he's the good guy that's going to come and save the world from its crazy toxic waste. And depending on, background and orientation and predisposition and bias, people bought in. Conversely, people bought into the other side, right? And they've got us to wrap things up. I support and hopefully tried to, I explained why I would, if I had a national audience, a stronger, larger. I've gone viral. I've been picked up. I've got endorsements. I would still have, prior to this election, I would have publicly supported, everyone rallying behind Team Blue and this particular ticket. Cognizant and aware of all the critique, valid and invalid, real and imagined, that's been thrown at them. Because I believe in baby steps. And I believe that the calling to healing inherently brings about an understanding that the absolutist vilification tactic is an absurd one. We are brothers and sisters in being each other. We are brothers and sisters, if I may speak from the royal we perspective for a hot second, despite, having otherified myself at the beginning of the show. Because this is true, and here's where it gets a little weird and wonky, and people get like, what the fuck does that have to do with politics, man? This is true of all life. So it must be true of politicians and of those theoretically in the background or in the shadows pulling the strings and manipulating political events. Okay, and here we get to the critical, controversial, but I think quite liberating ingredient in the thesis that I'm weaving together, that I think we should rigorously, scientifically test, and maybe, as we do that, launch a political party to represent the voices of those who choose to investigate this idea as a proponent for like, hey, what if it does sort of solve the world's problems? What if we did look at politics through the lens of what would heal people the most? Is that really so crazy? In a world where the Catholic Church and the 31 flavors of Christianity dominated politically and ideologically for almost 3,000 years, is it really so crazy to ask, like, can we just start working towards healing anyways then? I'll leave it to you folks to contemplate that thought for now. As always, I humbly thank you for joining me on the roundabout spirally madness that is my mouth unleashed without other people to converse with. And I humbly beg you to consider joining me in manifesting some not so distant future in which I have two delightful collaborators to collaborate with. Because that was the original vision. Me and two other people. And I think it was like borrowing from radio, where there's often been like two guys and one girl talking, which may or may not be somehow symbolically representative of the deeply flawed, ingrained masculine bias in our culture and society that is reverberated throughout history. But I wanted to flip that upside down, right? Like, you know what I'm talking about? Like, you're driving to work. It's rush hour. You turn on your radio. It's automatically on your favorite station, and your funny Giggle Times radio talk show is on. A lot of those, and I know that I'm painting with a broad stroke here, but a lot of those were the ones I like to listen to, the ones I fell into that were of my sense of humor. I realized, it dawned on me, two guys and a girl. I'm like, why isn't it two girls and a guy? Where the girls are the sort of, like, I want them to be the anchors and me to be the extra voice, right? And sort of the intro, outro guy. I introduce them, I read the audience comments, and I get my corner my moment in the show to be like, and here's what grinds my gears. Sorry, don't sue me, Family Guy. I just love that you all turned that into an actual thing for a hot second. There should be a whole epic miniseries, sub-series of That Really Grinds My Gears. And maybe there is. I don't know. Anyways, I digress. At any rate, here I am, faking it till I make it, trying to vision board it into existence, and I humbly thank you for tuning in. And as always, friends, I beg, I hope, I plead with the universe, I invoke, I wish for you that peace, love, and grooviness blossom in your heart. Word to politically wise on both sides. Just because the election doesn't mean it's I would keep the pressure on. Maybe not so much by trashing things on the streets. We're going to do a little bit of a discussion in the future episode about why the left looks bad when it looks bad. Because, we still got X many days before Trump is out, and there's plenty to worry about. But there's also a lot to worry about when the blue tyranny is in charge. Because, as you know, normally it isn't so normal. But we shouldn't just hang back. We get back to whatever